on your one. Today encapsulates everything to do with smartphone photography. So we've spent the day basically looking at the principles of composition, how to get good technical quality out of the sensor on your smartphone, and then looking at more advanced third-party apps like Hyperlapse and Plotograph and others that allow you to do, extra sprinkle on top good stuff with your photography. So I was asked if I could give a couple of tips for users who might be tuning in. My tips will be as follows. The first thing is the difference between a good photograph and a snap is simply a breath. And what I mean by that is it's become so simple to take a photograph with your smartphone that people have even stopped really looking at what they're photographing. It just becomes. But the key thing, if you want a really good photograph, is to really just take a moment to observe the composition of the shot. It can be the difference between a loose and half average shot and a really, really powerful one. So look at things like symmetry, convergence, look at your horizon line, use the principles of rule of third. It doesn't matter what camera app you use, you can get caught up about all that afterwards, but the native stock camera on most smartphones, if they're premier or premium smartphones at this stage, are more than adequate to take a really, really powerful shot. And at the end of the day, it's all about capturing a moment that will solicit a response in the viewer. The first thing would be we've kind of simplified down the type of shots that you need for sequences into just three. So the three shots to look for are wide shots, which effectively tell the viewer where a story is happening, mid shots, basically from the navel to the top of the head, which tell the viewer who the core subject of the story is, and then close-up shots, which particularly for content that's being viewed on mobile are extremely important and often the shots that are missed. And when I say close-up, I've been saying this all day, when I say close-up, I really mean close-up, as in anywhere between 12 and 6 inches away from the lens. So the camera really needs to get close to the action, but don't zoom. Lots of people are used to the idea of pinch to zoom with the phone. If you do that, you risk degrading the quality. So move with your feet, get close to the subject, fix your focus and exposure, and record. If you've shot enough sequences, you can show the person in vision for the first 15 or maybe 18 seconds of what they have to say, and then detach their voice track and use that underneath a sequence, which continues on for the rest of the story. And if really necessary, you can come back to show them one more time before the report ends. That allows you to bridge any edits that you've made in their actual answers. So it will be seamless. As long as you edit it correctly, it will be seamless and the audience won't notice the fact that there are jumps in the actual interviews. So bridging interview edits with sequences is one technique, and it's my preference. The other technique is very simply to use cutaway shots of people as you do the interview. And classically, those cutaway shots might be someone playing with a ring, it could be someone shaking their hand, it could be someone wagging their foot, or it could be a reverse angle shot over the shoulder of the reporter as they're actually conducting the interview. We touched on this as well on the course, where we talked about, if you have an iPhone and an iPad, or an Android and an Android tablet, you can use the two of those as a two-camera setup. So classically, as in this setup right now, the phone is shooting me for the master shot, but a second device just out of vision over here, over my shoulder, could get the shot of the actual reporter conducting the interview as well. And that can be used as a bridging shot between edits as well. So there's lots of different options and techniques for how you bridge those edits, but the bottom line is, at all costs, don't jump cut two answers back to back. That's really sloppy editing. If you're really, really stuck, and you have no other option available to you, you can use a feature in iMovie and in other editing applications called dip to white. It's not a dissolve. For one instant, the entire frame just dips to the color of white and then comes back. And that's what I'd refer to as a get out of jail card for interview editing. This is John Inge. Hello. It's live streaming that I want to talk to you about, because a couple of the conversations that came up around live streaming today, one of the first observations was you need to be aware of the fact that when all your energy is focused on the screen in front of you, no one is watching your back. And that's the first and biggest risk. So when you go to a location where you're going to choose where you're going to stream from, aside from just the practicalities of considering sound and considering where the light is, which you would for any type of filming, you also need to consider where are the nearest evacuation routes in case you get into a sticky situation. So you need to effectively do a kind of for want of a better word, a kind of a security screening of the location and identify where your evacuation routes are should you get into trouble. And the other thing it's worth doing is, if you're working for an organization, discuss in advance what their policy is in the event of you being challenged. And what I mean by that, and this is a real world environment, I've had former staff of mine in this situation. If someone approaches you in a very aggressive fashion, or even worse, approaches you with some sort of a weapon, what's the corporate policy on how you deal with that situation? Certainly my advice is, don't get into an argument about the device. Lock the screen to try and protect the content that is on the device, and then just let it go. As soon as you can, if you're on iOS, log on to a web portal, get into iCloud and do the erase. The chances of you getting the phone back at that point are slim to none. Whatever you do, don't track the phone and then try and confront the individual that took it from you. There's been 3 or 4 instances of this publicized where people turned up and confronted a thief and basically were killed. And I don't think any amount of technology is worth that sort of risk. So find out from your company what's the official policy in relation to being challenged or in a hostile environment. And if you think, before you even ever consider the stream, if you think you're going into a location where there are risks, then bring someone with you. Have someone watch your back. Have someone there ready to basically help you out if you start to get into a sticky spot. Well, the last day for me on the Thomson Foundation Summer Convergence course, and today we're looking at 360-degree video and virtual reality, augmented reality and all that other reality stuff. So the key tips that I've told them today when they're out filming is to remember this idea that the camera is effectively a surrogate for the viewer. And what I mean by that is, if they fall into the trap of putting the camera down really, really low and someone puts a headset on to experience it, then they're going to feel like they're Stuart Little, that they're literally crawling along the ground. And equally, if you use a selfie stick and you decide to actually put this, really, really way up high, they're going to feel like they're basically floating way above their body, which feels completely unnatural. And then the last thing we talked about was this idea of motion, camera motion, and how if you don't really give proper consideration to how you move the camera, you can induce motion sickness in the viewer, particularly if they're in a headset. So I've given them all that to consider, and I'm interested to see what they come back with. The key thing, though, we spoke about was the idea of what makes a good 360/VR experience. And I've talked to them about this idea of not falling into the trap of just trying to shoot a traditional TV story in 360. That doesn't work. You need it to be based on this idea of bringing the audience and bringing them to a location or bringing them to an experience and finding something that they're going to want to explore. There's no point in bringing them somewhere if the only thing that's happening is right in front of them. You want a space where there's lots of other things for them to look at all around. That's the nature of 360-degree content. So I'm interested to see what they come back with and how they get on with the post-production workflow. So it's been an intense week, and they've all, they've come through like troopers through all the different sessions, and this is the final part of my contribution, so we'll wait and see what they come up with.